More protests broke out in Tennessee after Republicans there unveiled a new congressional map that cuts through the state's majority black district and could flip the state's sole Democratic seat, delivering them an all GOP federal delegation. Tomorrow, the General Assembly is expected to return for final votes. The nightcap panel is still here. We had a very spirited discussion about all of this in the break. Daniela, this is the state's lone Democratic congressional congressional representative likely being drawn out of his district. When the VRA, Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, when that decision came down last week from the Supreme Court, there was a lot of talk about members of the Congressional Black Caucus and what this means for them. This Democratic district is not represented by a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. Steve Cohen is a Democrat, but he's a white man. So this is actually about black voters and their ability to select the candidate of their choosing. And this map, if it goes through, will not allow them to do that.
Yeah, but to be clear, this is a white Democrat representing a district in Tennessee. But what we saw in Louisiana was Cleo Fields drawn out of his district after that ruling. So it will predominantly affect black Democrats in Congress.
About 30% of the Congressional Black Caucus could be vulnerable. But I mean...
And it's notable. I mean, it's drawing out minority people from different districts could really have an impact on who represents who in Congress. If you're doing that, especially in a state like Tennessee or Louisiana, where there's a lot of black voting communities, they're not going to have representation in Congress, and they're not going to have a say, and they'll be diluted in other districts with predominantly Republican voters, and that's not what the intent was in all of this when it became drawing districts for people to be represented in Congress.
That was not the original intent. You know, John, across the South, I mean, as Daniela is putting it, states are moving with record speed. There's Louisiana, there is Alabama. Kay Ivey is now trying to, they literally, they were in the middle of a tornado warning, and the sirens were going off in the legislature today, and they rushed a bill through. Like I literally watched the live stream. Florida, they have passed a map. There are talks about South Carolina moving. They're specifically targeting districts that were drawn to protect the voting power of racial minorities. I know folks are saying this is the Supreme Court even is not about race, but they are literally, when given the opportunity, drawing districts that make it very clear it is about race.
Let's not forget, the jet fuel powering Trumpism is the fear of a substantial segment of the white population that America is becoming a majority-minority country and that white people are going to lose their primacy in our culture, in our politics, in our economics. And so if they can reduce that threat, what they see as a threat, they're going to do it. And that's exactly what's happening.
And they've done it in ways that really are baffling, to take the city of Nashville and carve it in four, specifically so that Nashville itself isn't represented by one congressional district, but pieces of it are suddenly joined with rural communities. I mean, in what universe does it seem fair for an urban city to be carved up and mixed with suburban? Well, yes, when you're looking at potentially the only black representation in the area, this is how they justify these moves. And the Supreme Court weighing in, repeatedly. It's not just this current moment of gerrymandering, but how they've taken apart the Voting Rights Act for several years now, and to say that the racial injustices of the past are no longer enough to explain why you have to have a particular map, as if racism in voting doesn't exist today.
Well, Justice Alito said it actually does not.
Same reason they're trying to get immigrants out and birthright citizenship. They're trying to preserve place in the United States, control in the United States for white people.
There was a daily episode about this, actually, from NPR, the daily podcast this week. Maybe it was last week, but the episode talked about that there are, it was about political violence and examining that, and that there are two drivers for how the anxiety lots of people are feeling in this country. One is the changing demographics. The other was the wealth gap. And I disagree with some of it. I'd encourage people to listen to it. What is the White House saying about all of this? I know they feel emboldened after coming out of Indiana last night, but I mean, is talk that the governor's mansions in Iowa and Ohio could be up for grabs. Democrats seem to think that they have a very good chance, according to the chair of the Democratic Governors Association, of getting those seats.
I think what's interesting about this redistricting effort is before the Supreme Court's decision last week on the Voting Rights Act, the sense was that this was really a failed effort. They felt as though they didn't really gain much. Perhaps it was tilted towards Democrats even when it comes to redistricting. But ever since that decision, there is now this push to really capitalize on it, to see where else they can get more seats when it comes to the House. And I think, yeah, it puts a lot of pressure on President Trump and his political team, namely James Blair, whose idea this all was. And so now that this decision has come down, they're going to try to pick up as many seats as possible. But really, before that decision, this was really seen as a failed attempt.
I just want to take a step back because it is, I think we're in it every day, so we talk about it and like, well, this is what they're doing. But this is remarkable. The White House is leading an effort across this country, according to our own MS Now reporting and others, to literally carve up districts that they think will make it more palatable for them to win, as opposed to literally going out there to earn the votes. In America, in our democracy, the people are supposed to pick the elected officials, not the other way around.
Can I say, it started in Texas.
Yes.
My home state, my beloved home state. And it started with President Donald Trump. Your point earlier, Simone, I can't remember if it was during the break because we've been talking a lot, but wanting to find some extra seats because he was so worried about what could happen in the midterms. So that consequence led to what Akela was saying, where they started panicking because Democrats responded. It became a tit-for-tat situation. And now we're seeing that after the Supreme Court ruling, with a Supreme Court that's largely made up by Trump appointees, it's a conservative Supreme Court, now they see a lot of opportunity in the South. It's just going to escalate.
Let's remember, though, Republicans take a risk when they do this.
Yes, because there's no guarantee.
The way you get more seats is by spreading your Republicans out to more places. Like, that's what redistricting is. You take the safest members and you make them less safe to try to bulk up other districts. When you have a president who's in the mid-30s approval rating, some of those seats you think you're creating for your party are not going to be won by your party.
They saw that in Texas in those races that happened in 2025. I will just say, in the post-Reconstruction world, after the 15th Amendment, they didn't repeal the 15th Amendment. They gave black men the right to vote. They just hollowed it out. The courts helped hollow it out. The state legislatures helped hollow it out. They stopped enforcing it. And it took about 88 years between the 15th Amendment. It was the Voting Rights Act that brought people back to the place that we were 88 years before then. So I will just note that, this feels like that moment.
And it's what the Voting Rights Act did with the federal pre-clearance. You could not change even a polling station in these specific districts that had a history of racial segregation, of racial profiling in voting. There was another body that oversaw that and allowed those changes to happen by removing
Shelby County
that.
in 2013 got rid of that one.
Get rid of that.